Good morning. Good morning and welcome to our third annual Never Is Now conference. You know, ever since I started as ADL CEO nearly 3.5 years ago, the thing that's kept me up at night was the fear that I would wake up one morning to the news of something horrible that might happen to the Jewish community. I worry that I would wake up to the buzz of my phone to learn of an attack on a school or a synagogue where some crazed extremist had massacred a room full of students or a sanctuary full of worshipers. In my mind, in this kind of wildest dream, the locale might be Paris or Istanbul, London or Tehran, and the reason would be simple, that these people would be killed because they were Jews. And over these past few years as the CEO of ADL, I have found myself standing with a heavy heart in otherwise really unremarkable places that have become holy sites consecrated by the blood of Jewish martyrs. I have laid tefillin at the kosher market in Paris, where gunmen took hostages and murdered 4 Jews. I have bowed my head at the Jewish Museum in Brussels, where a terrorist opened fire and killed 4 tourists. I have stood in the Har Nof neighborhood of Jerusalem, where worshipers were butchered in cold blood as they said their morning prayers. And I have said a silent Kaddish at the entrance to the shul in Copenhagen, where a gunman slayed a security guard who was literally protecting a bat mitzvah ceremony. And each time I walked away worried about our European brothers and sisters, worried but comforted by the fact that it couldn't happen here in America. And then there was Pittsburgh. My worst nightmare, our worst nightmare, had happened right here. And it was the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in American history. I am guessing that each one of us, every one of you sitting here in this room right now, remember where you were when you heard the news. And many of us in this room know someone, a friend, or maybe a relative from Pittsburgh, from that amazing Jewish community. And as we reflect on the tragedy, that's why, this is the reason that now more than ever, for me, it is so gratifying to see all of you here today. Because while the horror of that massacre still hurts, while that wound is yet to heal, I would tell you that what happened in Squirrel Hill was shocking, but not surprising. You see, ADL has been tracking and fighting anti-Semitism for over 100 years. And while Jews have enjoyed an extraordinary, a historic degree of acceptance and achievement in this country, no matter what anyone tells you, the recent trends are alarming. While anti-Semitic incidents had been generally declining for more than a decade, until 2016, last year we saw the single largest increase in 40 years of tracking this data. And regardless of what some might say, this is a plain, empirical, quantifiable fact. We saw a 57% surge in anti-Semitic incidents, a spike that included high-profile moments like neo-Nazis marching in Charlottesville, chanting, "Jews will not replace us," alongside high-profile acts of vandalism and a seemingly unending cascade of acts of bullying, harassment, and intimidation. Part of this sharp rise came from anti-Semitic incidents at K through 12 schools and college campuses. Schools right here in New York, right here in Manhattan, universities right here in New York and across the country. Those incidents nearly doubled for the second year in a row. And for those who still have any lingering doubts, who don't believe, the latest FBI statistics corroborated our findings. The FBI tracked a 17% increase in overall hate crimes, a 38% increase in anti-Semitic incidents that constituted 58%, more than half of all faith-based crimes. They were committed, more than 58%, against Jewish individuals and institutions. And we are but 2% of this U.S. population. In the U.S. and around the world, anti-Semitism, unfortunately, has persisted across the ages. So the question my staff, the question I ask, the question many people ask me is why this? Why here? And why now? Well, to start, feeding this upsurge in hate is the toxic soup of anti-Semitism found online. Whether it's on Facebook or 4chan, social media creates its own reality. People feed off the anonymity, and trolling passes for talking in so many spaces. Look, it's easier to insult or attack a person when you don't have to confront them in real life. And then these cowards, they use their namelessness to attack Jews or others, often with some of the most disgusting images and language you can imagine. Believe me, I see it in my feed every single day. Social media also enables you to tailor what you read and with whom you speak, so you get the sense that everyone thinks and talks just like you do. And soon, the abnormal becomes normal. Taboos fall away. And this is what's left. You see, as much as this is distorting, it can also be empowering. Recall that the shooter in Pittsburgh, the last thing he did before he went to that synagogue was post about it on Gab, itself a hotbed of anti-Semitism. But you see, this is not just a problem for the online world. We see a similar phenomenon unfolding in the real world, too. When anti-Semitism and hateful rhetoric is elevated or tolerated, either through appropriating the rhetoric outright of others, call it dog whistling, or just allowing the hate to go unanswered, my friends, it sends a signal. Over the past few years, these signals have become signposts for anti-Semites. For them, it is crystal clear, the message. And it's sad to say, but as we talk about the abnormal becoming normal, increasingly it seems that we are witnessing the normalization of anti-Semitism right here at home. This past year, we saw a record number of candidates, unapologetic, explicitly extremist candidates and bigots running on the balloting campaigns across the country at all levels. And we've seen a shocking surge of anti-Semitism on campuses, with most university administrators pathetically slow or fecklessly stumbling in their responses. And the rate to which this language has seeped into the mainstream is stunning. There are those, including the President of the United States, who rail against globalists that are ruining the country. This term globalist was popularized by the alt-right, who regularly use it as a euphemism for Jews. This past election, there were television ads run by mainstream political candidates and parties that shamefully portrayed the Jewish philanthropist George Soros, casting him as a grotesque caricature pulled right out of the pages of the Protocols of Zion, responsible for all the world's ills. Earlier this year, a congressman from Florida literally invited a Holocaust denier to sit with him in the Capitol and watch the State of the Union. And a city council member in D.C. bafflingly claimed that the Rothschilds were manipulating the weather to harm his community. It happened. And yet neither of these elected officials were censured or disciplined by their respective bodies. This fall, another member of Congress, Steve King from Iowa, endorsed a neo-Nazi for elected office and openly met with a far-right anti-Semitic political party in Austria on a visit paid for by the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. And yet he also faced no consequences. Earlier this month, Louis Farrakhan of the Nation of Islam called the Jews termites, and too many leaders, many of whom have dedicated their lives to social justice, overlooked it, noted but dismissed it, or simply continued to embrace him nonetheless. And when such behavior is acknowledged, even the contrition can be chilling. Just a few weeks ago, one so-called leader, while she was ostensibly apologizing to the Jewish community for her insensitivity to anti-Semitism, in the very same breath, in the very same Facebook post, she leveled the classic anti-Semitic stereotype of dual loyalty, claiming that Jews only pretend to be progressive because actually, well, their real allegiance lies with the Jewish state. Now, some have said, and I hear this a lot, all these happenings are not equivalent. I get that. And I agree. But make no mistake, every single one of them matters. And so, my friends, it is time. This must end. All of it. Across the political spectrum, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, Americans, whether they are online or offline, and all responsible leaders from across our society, whether you sit in the Oval Office or you sit in the C-suite or you sit behind the dean's chair at a university, it's time to step forward and clearly, consistently, and quickly denounce anti-Semitism and hate once and for all. And whether you are a leader or an ordinary person, people of all faiths and ideologies must speak out clearly and quickly against anti-Semitism, stereotyping, and scapegoating in our society. But the good news, I would say, the good news is that the American people are good. And I can tell you, I am seeing this happen. Americans of all walks of life are indeed standing with us just as we stand with them. You know, I felt it when civil rights leaders from across the country reached out to me just hours after the news broke of the horror in Pittsburgh to express their condolences. They asked me, what could we do to help? I saw it in Pittsburgh myself. when I went to visit at the invitation of the community and stood with Wasim Muhammad of the local Islamic Center, who shared with me about the hundreds of thousands of dollars he had raised from the Muslim community to rebuild the Tree of Life sanctuary. And I was reminded of it just a few days ago when I heard firsthand from the students at Duke University, the Jewish students who shared how non-Jewish students of color joined hands with them after the Jewish community repeatedly was targeted by anti-Semitic attacks. Together, they demanded that the Duke administration do more to fight hate. We must value these gestures because it takes courage to stand up, to reach out, and to lock arms. And now, at this moment, mustering that courage is the charge for each and every one of us. So if your favorite politician is attacking George Soros or the globalists, or if a member of Congress from your party is embracing Holocaust deniers, you must stand up and tell them to stop. And we need to do so even if they profess a love for Israel up and down. And if your allies in a range of social justice causes or commentators on our cable news channels demonize the Jewish state and deny the Jewish people the same right that they demand for others, they need to know that they can no longer be your ally. If your favorite social media platform continues to refuse to remove anti-Semitic garbage from its site, then vote with your clicks and deactivate your account. And as we do this, as we take these steps, let's not lose sight of what it is we are saying or who we are standing up for. We are speaking up to stop prejudice, not to score political points. You see, in this moment, the Jewish community must be united. Sure, we have our differences. Of course, we will argue and argue and argue about those differences, but we shouldn't allow anyone to exploit this moment for partisan gain. Because when it comes to fighting anti-Semitism, there are no politics, only principles, and we must be united. Now look, I know this isn't easy. I get it. It is not pleasant to tell a friend or a fellow traveler that they are wrong. It can be hard to pull out of a group or to withdraw from a march because of the bigotry of some of its leaders. And it can be painful to break up a relationship because of someone's belief. But, my friends, this is a small price to pay when we remember the price that Jews have paid throughout the ages. Indeed, we stand here today on the shoulders of those who came before us, and we owe it to them to stand up for our values now. Because we know from our own history how the story ends when good people stand down. More than anyone, we have seen the cost of silence. We have paid the price of passivity. And so we will be vigilant, and we will demand that our allies, that our friends, be better, because the fight against anti-Semitism isn't just our fight, it is their fight too. And just the same, the fight against racism, xenophobia, misogyny, anti-Muslim bias, homophobia, as a proud Jew with so much privilege, these are my fights too. In this moment, we will be for ourselves, but we will also be there for others. Because now is the time to act. Now is the time to stand tall. Now is the time to get to work, because never is now.